Hello and welcome back to the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. My name is Torwen and I'm joined today by my co-host Aidan. I'm pretty excited for today's episode. I think it's something that a lot of you are going to find useful and it's something that we often see in practice. So today we're going to be talking about the biggest nutrition mistakes we see for muscle gain.
So each of us have written down our own mistakes, things that we're going to talk about, and we're probably just going to go back and forth on them.
I'll start it off then, and I'm going to start with not eating enough. We know that eating in a calorie surplus is optimal to gain muscle in the most efficient way because it does provide the extra fuel for things like the anabolic growth processes, rebuilding muscle, recovery, but also maximising that protein synthesis, along with accounting for the increased metabolism of having more muscle and also the thermic effect of digesting food.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many things to go in with that. I feel like this shouldn't be a controversial take at all. It is definitely a common one, particularly like under eating is obviously going to slow down muscle growth. And an extreme thought experiment I've got, because there are some people out there who will talk about the concept of not needing to be in a surplus at all. An extreme thought experiment I would point to is, what if somebody was like at quite a low baseline body weight at all to start off with? There obviously needs to be a surplus for their body weight to go up at all, and that person is capable of gaining enough muscle to increase their body weight and everything like that. You would need a surplus for that person to optimize muscle growth. It gets a bit more interesting when we're talking about somebody at a really high body fat percentage to start off with and anything like that. But I would say, one, without a shadow of doubt, that a small surplus or a surplus is required to maximize muscle growth. And two, even with the odd controversy that exists a little bit among some people, is if you do just straight up just look at research that looks at people eating at roughly maintenance versus a small surplus versus a massive surplus, the massive surplus does technically still lead to more muscle growth than the other two as well. So good evidence that this actually matters.
The big question always has been how big this surplus should be. And it's not super clear, but we know that, like I said before, we want to gain muscle in the most efficient way. So like you said, a large surplus might lead to a little bit more muscle gain, but likely it'll lead to a lot more fat gain as well. And it's about finding the balance of where that is worth it. So one of the studies I looked at nutrition intervention for body composition of elite athletes.
Is this Scarf et al?
I think so.
Yes.
Probably got the same one. And they looked at those in a small calorie surplus, which was about 200 calories surplus on top of their maintenance, compared to people who had a lot more, about a 500 calorie surplus.
Yeah.
And the difference in muscle gain was only marginally bigger for those who had a larger surplus, but they did gain dramatically more fat as well.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Like literally it was just like this tiny difference in muscle growth and a massive difference in fat gain. I wish I had a great visual, this is a podcast, but to like literally demonstrate how drastic of a difference that I'm talking about. And it makes it so clear that, to me, I believe small surpluses are the way to go. And this is just one small sample size study, but it is pretty representative of what we do see, both in terms of research and also in terms of practice. And that's why this is the second mistake, like eating too many calories, because something that I personally like to use as a bit of an analogy on this concept is think about how much muscle you can gain in a year. Don't go overly generous. Like, be realistic here, but think about how much muscle you can gain in a year. Assume you're training hard. Assume that you don't get injuries or anything major, and just think like best case scenario, realistically, how much muscle can you gain in a year? I don't want to put a number out there because there's a few reasons why I don't want to put a number out there. One, I don't want to put limiting beliefs on you. I want you all to like gain as much muscle as you can. And two, I don't want to get into specifics of like how long you've been training for. Are you male or female? Do you have good genetics? I don't want to get into all that. But most people should have a realistic number. And then think about rate of monthly gain. And if your rate of monthly gain massively exceeds that number that you could gain over the course of a year, by definition, you have to be gaining a lot of body fat. And going into the details a little bit more, like a 500 calorie surplus, oversimplified, could result in about half a kilo of weight gain per week. How long can you run that for? With a lot of that being muscle.
Yeah, and even being able to match training load to then put on that body muscle as well.
Yeah, so that's why it's such a common one I see, but I see how it happens. Obviously, I spend a lot of time in the sport of powerlifting, and it's such a huge one where people have a competition coming up, so they want to be as strong as they can for comp day, and they have a weight class to fill out. So say it's like a 90 kilo weight class and they weigh 85 kilos and they want to compete in the 90 kilo class. They'll be like, oh, I'll just gain 5 kilos over the next 8 weeks or something like that. By definition, a lot can't be muscle.
I think the next one I want to talk about is protein, and there are so many angles that we can take from this. But let's start about looking at insufficient protein intake. That's probably the biggest and most important one. So
yeah, my standard range, and I'm going to give caveats here, my standard range I recommend for most people looking to build muscle is 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. You will see other ranges, you'll see broader ones, you'll see ones that are slightly lower and everything like that. I think if you're looking to maximize muscle gain and you're going below that, you're likely going too low. The other caveat that I'm going to give on this is that I do genuinely believe that it is more about it being diminishing returns if you go above that, even the 2.2 number, and less about it being like you're capped at 2.2 and going beyond that does absolutely nothing. This is a slightly different take to what I think a lot of other people are saying, but I have a few reasons for this. One, and this is the funniest one. If I open a study and it compares 3.4 grams per kilo of protein to 2.0, and I just ask myself the question, which group's going to gain the most muscle? I'm always going to pick the 3.4, and I look down at the bottom of the study, the 3.4 led to more muscle growth. And then two, when you do look at it all, like the combination of all the research and chart it out and you see the muscle growth, there is typically more the higher you go. But I cannot stress enough how much diminishing returns it is, where it's like it's the tiniest increase in muscle growth, which then makes you wonder, one, how much does this really matter? Two, do most people care about that? And then three, what is the cost of doing that in terms of like what are you taking away from other stuff?
And that's what I was going to add there, because absolutely you could push protein intake extremely high, but is it getting in the way of consuming other nutrient-dense foods? Are you replacing healthy fats, carbs, any of those sorts of things? So I agree. The balance that I find is between that 1.6 and 2.2 generally.
Yeah, 100%. That's where I go for most people. This actually does lead in pretty well into another topic that I think is a mistake, and that's not prioritizing micronutrient intake, because one, obviously this matters just for general health and how you feel, but it also has carryover effects for performance more often indirectly than directly. But if we're going to like list some stuff, we'll talk about magnesium, vitamin D, omega-3s, illness and immunity stuff in relation to zinc. We spoke on the last podcast about, does magnesium help sleep? Statistically, based on the research looking at magnesium intake and sleep, people with higher intakes get better sleep. I often caveat that with the whole healthy user bias kind of thing about, do people with higher magnesium intakes have higher intakes of other things that help them sleep? But that still falls into this same category of focusing more on micronutrients.
Absolutely. And we could even look at other macronutrients there as well then, because another one for me is people who then neglect carbohydrates. And we so often see people who are wanting to gain muscle who talk about protein, and they don't consider that carbohydrates still are there to help enhance performance. We know it's the body's and brain preferred fuel source. If you're able to fuel your sessions well, you're often able to give more in sessions too, which will lead to more muscle gain there as well.
Yeah, I truly do believe that. And something that I think is a bit of a shame is that we don't have great research just directly comparing body composition outcomes in a small calorie surplus or in a calorie surplus in general. So like theoretically, it makes sense. In practice, both theoretically and in practice, we'll see that people will get more reps out, particularly if they're doing higher volume training later in the sets. They have more glycogen and stuff like that. So of course they can perform better. What we don't have is like a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet versus a high carb diet with protein matched and calories matched with a decent amount of studies. Because one of the things that gets in the way of that research even really existing is in practice, most people on low carb diets do not reach a small calorie surplus, particularly when they're newer to the diet. So every time studies have compared muscle gain with these different approaches, the high carb diet always outperforms by a fair bit. And this is just because people are under eating in the other group in most cases. So I wish we had that to compare, but like right now my stance is I do believe that if you had calories and protein match, high carb diets would outperform still.
Yeah, absolutely. What about fat then? This is an interesting one because I come from the standpoint that we want to still meet minimum fat requirements. Absolutely. We want to be able to support hormone function, brain function, any of those sorts of things. But at what point do you feel like it starts impacting overall macronutrient?
So I definitely agree on the same page with like, I wouldn't go too low. So a safe bet is I wouldn't go below 0.5 grams per kilo of body weight per day with fat. You could argue about where the limit is. Like you could say maybe you could go a little bit lower, maybe it should be a little bit higher. You could definitely argue, I've just picked a number that I believe is acceptable. In men where we see measures of testosterone increasing a little bit more as fat intake gets even a little bit higher than that, I haven't seen any evidence of that translating to more muscle growth. And without context, that sounds like a dumb take. We're like, obviously testosterone leads to more muscle growth. There's a reason people inject it. But like the small increases that we see from the small increase in dietary fat, or even a major increase in dietary fat, isn't something that typically is translating in research to more muscle growth. And there's other arguments there about like, what if it's because it's coming at the cost of more protein or carbs or other things as well? And obviously, because you've got to control for calories are made up of protein, fats, and carbs. If your fat intake got too high, and for the sake of this, I think there's very few circumstances where I would recommend over 100 grams of fat if we were looking to optimize muscle gain. If your fat intake got too high and you want to meet protein intake, by definition, you end up with a lower carbohydrate intake and you might have lower glycogen stores for training.
Yeah. I wanted to swing back to protein because I like to look at it that protein, okay, the biggest thing for us is that your daily protein intake is high enough. We could then also chat about things like protein distribution across the day, what quality protein you're having, and when you're having this protein. So when we're looking at muscle protein synthesis, I've had a look at a few studies here, but eating frequently and spreading that protein intake across the day is linked to better muscle protein synthesis, specifically across that 24-hour period.
Yeah, and I think that is very much the consensus, or should be the consensus. I believe it was not last year, but the year before, so 2023, we're recording this in 2025. There was a study from Jorn, I don't know how you say it, Tromelon? I don't know how you say it. Apologies to Jorn. But he put out a study that, how he worded it, something that kind of like made him do this study was he was fully bought in on this concept of protein distribution mattering. And then he went to Brazilian barbecue one day and he had like heaps of protein. And he said like he burped and like 8 hours later he burped and he tasted Brazilian barbecue. He's like, hang on, is this still digesting? If this is still digesting, like, am I still getting muscle protein synthesis from it? And it's a funny story, but he's also then like, he's obviously had this question in his mind for ages being like, what if we compared an absurdly high amount of protein to a small amount of protein? Is muscle protein synthesis still raised? And he did this study where he compared 100 grams of protein to 25 grams of protein to 0. And they would just eat this and then they would just wait and measure their protein synthesis over a long period of time. And they found that 100 outperformed 25. And a lot of people in the nutrition world absolutely jumped on this study and were like, protein distribution does not matter anymore. It is a situation where I've just never seen anything like it, where there are many people who believe that you could only eat 30 grams in a single sitting and that was a cap and you need to distribute it heaps across the day and this is the most important thing, who absolutely swung the pendulum to being like, this does not matter at all. And if you really listen to the details of that study, all he compared was 100 to 25. If you listen to him talk about it, he's not acting like this is this like groundbreaking thing. If you think about it deeper, he didn't even test 100 versus 25 versus 25, 25, like across the day. Like it's not testing distribution. It's just saying like, if we only ate once, does more outperform less? So it comes back to what I personally have thought for a very, very, very long time. That's like total protein matters the most. Distribution still matters as well.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that one for sure. Another interesting one that I wanted to bring up, and this was part of this study, but muscle protein synthesis was about 25% higher when it was distributed across the 3 meals. But if we look at specific meals alone then, having 30 grams of protein at breakfast compared to people who have 10 grams of protein at breakfast, they also have about 30% higher muscle protein synthesis. And I think that's a big one in terms of practicality because we know that people tend to distribute their protein later on in the day.
Yeah. Being
able to bring it in, look, it's got other benefits too, but having it early in the day is a positive thing.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest thing I want to see more studies on is like, say we're talking about that 1.6 to 2.2. I want to see more studies that compare, say, 2 meals of protein meeting that target versus like 4 or 5. I mean, like, does this make a noticeable difference to muscle protein synthesis or breakdown across the day? We just don't have much of that.
No, not at all. And I wanted to touch on this one because I think people always have questions about it. Let's chat about the anabolic window then if we're talking about distribution. I'll give my thoughts, but I'm open to hearing your thoughts there as well. So people tend to talk about this magical 1 hour or 60 minutes after your workout where you should have a lot more protein than typically. But generally we see that isn't really the case. And it's more of this 3 to 5 hour window where it's beneficial to consume 20 to 40 grams of protein because you have just damaged those muscle fibers. What are your thoughts there, Aidan?
Yeah, I'm big on that. So that the exact like phrasing you just used there largely comes from this study from Alan Aragon and Brad Schoenfeld from like 2014 or something like that. And it 100% aligns with my thoughts. And this is the thing I think a lot about with this whole timing concept, where say somebody does this pendulum swing to say it doesn't matter at all. It makes you wonder how far they would believe that to. Say there was this belief that you could just reach this target once per day and it works great. What if you reach double the target every second day? We obviously know, based on everything we know about protein, that that wouldn't be the case. And that is also how I view like the anabolic window type of stuff, where we do still have pretty clear evidence that having protein around, whether it's before or whether it's after, does help with muscle growth a little bit. It's a lower priority thing, but it still does matter. And the reason why before matters is because your digestion rate. If you had protein before, like within 1 or 2 hours before, note that interesting to how that would make you feel. But say you did have a decent amount of protein 1 or 2 hours before, it's like those amino acids are peaking at the end of your session, unless you do a really long session as well.
I'll add another one in there then with a mistake that I commonly see, and that is not using supplements to your advantage. Now, we could talk about many supplements here, but I think the two that massively stand out to me is obviously protein powder. And it's funny because I had a client actually ask me the other day, why do dietitians recommend protein powders? Why are they pushing these things that aren't coming from whole foods? And I want to rephrase that, because we're not pushing these things a lot of the time. But what we are doing is giving another option to increase protein intake in a simple and easy way to be able to reach overall protein targets.
Yeah, and the deeper you think about the criticisms of protein powder beyond somebody simply saying it's processed, there's not that many there. Like a common one that's even chucked out there is that it doesn't contain the micronutrients of whole foods. And if you look at that, like if you actually analyze that claim, it's really micronutrient rich. Like it contains a lot of the nutrients in there. It's really high in calcium and a few other things. It's just a potentially useful tool that could be convenient to replace other protein sources. Would it keep you as full as eating steak or chicken? Of course it not. Like from a satiety perspective, it wouldn't do the same job. But from a convenience perspective, ticking a bunch of boxes, it fits well. I'm assuming the other one on your list is creatine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I do see this as a huge, like I see this as a big mistake. So not having creatine consistently is the big mistake. I know a lot of people who have taken creatine and then have stopped or just are inconsistent. It is something that, based on the research, so this one's not my opinion, based on the research, people who take creatine build muscle around 1/3 faster. Note that the research is often looking at like 12-week phases and stuff like that. I'll also add the caveat that that's actually measuring muscle growth, not lean mass, because often with creatine, sometimes the numbers get skewed because people gain water, particularly early on, and that counts towards lean mass. I'm actually talking about muscle mass. Do I believe over a 5-year training career or whatever that creatine would lead to 1/3 more muscle? Of course, I don't believe that. But based on 12-week studies, it does seem to help with this. People are inconsistent in certain cases. I think this is an easy one to address. My logic is we often do a lot more for a lot less. I often think about the times that I'm in the gym and I'm doing my accessories and I'm on the last exercise. I'm like, I don't really want to be here, but I'm still doing it because it'll help me. Creatine is easier than that. And it helps more than that last 1 or 2 sets, most likely.
Yeah. And a big thing that we talk about is finding a time of day that you can have it consistently. It doesn't taste like much. Throw it into water, have it with juice, have it with a drink. It's so easy to add in. It's just one of those things, like you said, ideally you want to be super consistent with to see the complete benefits there.
Do you ever take on creatine gummies?
I know you've done a few posts about these, but look, we want them to contain creatine. You guys might have seen that there was all of that came out where a lot of the popular creatine gummy brands actually contained barely any creatine. What are your thoughts, Aidan? Do you recommend them? Are you...
Yeah, I'll go with both. So I'll start off with the fact that lots don't contain it, and that's obviously come to light. Firstly, funny, in hindsight, kind of obvious. I say that as a joke because it's like I wasn't out there being like, no, these don't contain creatine. But the funny one is some of them were like 6-gram gummies claiming, or some of them, the serving size was 6 grams of gummies, and they would claim to have 5 grams of creatine in 6 grams. And you're like,
how does that work?
How does that add up? Like you've clearly got like gelatin or something. You've got something else in there. Like there's no way that this is adding up. And then the other one is like, they taste nice. and like I'm personally somebody who doesn't really notice the taste of creatine, but I wouldn't be out there being like, oh, this tastes nice. Like my 2 cents on people taking them assuming they contain creatine is I'm for it for people who would otherwise be inconsistent. So our colleague Tyler, I do like his take on a lot of stuff, but like he's got one take on this where he's like, just be an adult and just have creatine. Like just put in your like don't spend like heaps of money on creatine because they're really expensive per gummy. Don't spend heaps of money on creatine gummies when you can just put the powder in water and just like have it. And I see that perspective. The other angle is what I said earlier. Heaps of people are inconsistent with creatine. Heaps of people, when you give them gummies, they take them consistently. And I'll leave it up to people to decide what they want to do. I personally would just have the powder. It's my preference. But I wouldn't be opposed to it. If somebody's always inconsistent and this solves the problem, I like that.
And if they're happy to pay that little bit extra for convenience, perfect.
Exactly.
That's
right.
a win-win.
So that summarizes all of our...
I was going to say, do you have anything else to add, or do you feel like that's everything that you had as well?
That covers my list, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm sure we could go on because this is something that we do talk about a lot in practice, but thank you so much for listening, guys. This has been episode 222 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast, and we hope that we've provided you with some useful feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love if you could please leave a rating or review. It does mean a lot to us and we really appreciate it. Thank you.